Hi there, and welcome to a quiet moment with me here at Haze and Hue. As the colors unfold, I'll be telling the story of Bound, a tale about an artist who witnesses something impossible and discovers that sometimes breaking a curse requires nothing more than speaking the truth you see in your heart. The sun was lower now, painting the sky in shades of coral and gold. Celine set up her easel in the tall grass at the edge of the marsh, her hands moving with the practiced ease of someone who had done this 1,000 times before. The light was perfect, that brief, precious hour when everything seemed to glow from within. She'd been coming to this spot for 3 weeks now, ever since she'd moved to the small coastal town. The move had been sudden, unplanned. After years in the city, working in a cramped studio apartment and feeling like she was suffocating, she'd finally admitted to herself that something had to change. Her art teacher back in the city had told her to find a place that spoke to her, somewhere she could return to again and again. Real artists don't chase inspiration, he'd said. They cultivate it in one sacred space. The marsh had called to her the first evening she'd walked past it. Something about the way the reeds whispered in the wind, the way the water caught the dying light. It felt like the world was trying to tell her something in a language she'd almost forgotten. Celine squeezed burnt sienna onto her palette, then added touches of violet and gold. She was just beginning to sketch the horizon line when she heard it. A sound like wind through feathers, like music made of air itself. 2 cranes descended from the dimming sky. They landed 30 feet away in a shallow pool surrounded by cattails. Celine froze, her brush hovering above the canvas. She'd seen cranes here before. The marsh was full of them, but never like this, never so close, never so deliberate. The birds were beautiful. Their feathers were grey-blue, darker on the wings, with long black plumes that caught the breeze. They stood nearly 4 feet tall, elegant and strange. But it was their eyes that made Celine's breath catch. They looked at her with an intelligence that seemed impossible, as if they recognized her, as if they'd been waiting. Then they began to dance. It started slowly. One crane lifted a foot, placed it down with careful grace. The other mirrored the movement. They bowed to each other, long necks carving the perfect arcs, and began to move in a circle. It was mesmerizing, part dance, part ritual, part conversation in a language without words. Celine's hand moved on its own, sketching quickly. She couldn't look away. The dance grew more elaborate. The cranes leapt into the air, wings spread wide, their movements perfectly synchronized. They called out to each other, voices high and clear, almost like singing. In the golden light, they seemed to shimmer, their edges blurring just slightly, as if they were made of something more than flesh and feathers. For a moment, just a heartbeat, Celine could have sworn she saw something else, the outline of human hands instead of wings, the curve of a shoulder where a bird's body should be. She blinked, and they were cranes again, nothing more. The sun touched the horizon. The dance ended as suddenly as it began. The two cranes stood still, facing each other, their beaks nearly touching. Then they turned as one and looked directly at Celine. She felt it like a weight on her chest, their gaze full of longing and hope and something that might have been desperation. Then they took flight, wings beating hard against the air, and disappeared into the darkening sky. Celine sat very still for a long time, her heart pounding. On her canvas was a rough sketch of two dancing figures, but she'd drawn them wrong. Instead of cranes, she'd somehow painted two people, arms raised, bodies arcing through movement she'd never seen but somehow knew. She looked down at her hands. They were shaking. That night, Celine couldn't sleep. She lay in her small rented room above the bakery, listening to the sound of the town settling down for the night. She kept seeing those cranes in her mind, the way they'd looked at her, the almost human shapes she'd glimpsed in the golden light. Finally, around midnight, she gave up on sleep. She made herself chamomile tea and sat at her small table, sketching by lamplight. She drew the cranes over and over, trying to capture what she'd seen, but every time her pencil wanted to draw people instead. A woman with long dark hair, a man with gentle eyes. At some point, exhaustion finally won. She fell asleep at the table, her cheek resting on her sketchbook. And then she dreamt. She stood in the same marsh, but it was different, older somehow, wild in a way the modern world had forgotten. The moon was full and impossibly bright, turning everything silver. The two cranes were there, standing in the shallows. As Celine watched, their form began to shift and blur. Feathers became skin, wings became arms, and suddenly two people stood where the birds had been. A man and a woman, both young, both beautiful, in an ancient way that made Celine's heart ache. They wore simple clothes from another time, tunics of undyed cloth, leather cords at their wrists. Finally, the woman said, her voice hoarse, as if she hadn't spoken in years. Finally, someone can see. Please, the man said, stepping forward. His eyes were the same as the crane's eyes, dark and knowing. Please, you have to help us. Celine tried to speak, but no sound came out. We are bound, the woman said, cursed to live as birds by day, human only when the sun has set. It's been so long, 999 years. Tomorrow is the last sunset, the man continued. Our last chance. If someone sees us transform, truly sees us, and speaks our names aloud before midnight, the curse breaks. If not, he trailed off, looking at his hands as if memorizing them. If not, we stay cranes forever, the woman finished softly. We'll forget we were ever human at all. We'll forget each other. How do I know your names? Celine asked, finding her voice at last. The woman smiled sadly. You don't. That's the trick of it, you see. That's what makes it nearly impossible. You have to witness the transformation, and in that moment of seeing, truly seeing, you'll know. The knowledge will rise up from somewhere deep inside you, from a place where all true names are kept. But we've tried so many times, the man said. His voice was breaking. We've danced for travellers, for painters, for poets. No one sees us. They look right at us and see only birds. The curse is clever, it's hidden us in plain sight. You're different, the woman said, reaching out as if she might touch Celine's face, though they stood too far apart. We felt it the moment you arrived. You see the world the way it really is. You're an artist, a real one. You look for the truth beneath the surface. But yesterday, Celine said, when I first saw you dance, the sun set, but you didn't transform. The curse is selective, the man explained. We only transform when someone with the sight is watching and truly ready to see. Yesterday, you weren't ready yet. You were still doubting, still thinking like the ordinary world thinks. Tomorrow, you will be ready. Tomorrow, you see us for who we really are. I don't understand, Celine said. Why were you cursed? What did you do? The two of them exchanged a glance, and Celine saw centuries of shared sorrow pass between them. We loved each other, the man said simply. That was our crime. I was the son of a village elder. She was from the family we'd been fooling with for 3 generations. When we refused to end it, when we ran away together, the village seer cursed us both. She said we could dance together forever, but never as ourselves. We would be beautiful and free, but trapped. Together, but separate. 999 years we've lived this way, the woman whispered. Tomorrow is our last chance. Please come back tomorrow. Watch us, really watch. And when you see who we are, when you know us, speak our names. The dream began to fade. Celine felt herself being pulled backward, away from the marsh, away from the 2 figures who looked at her with such desperate hope. Wait, she called out. How would I know if I'm right? How will I know your names? You know, the woman's voice came from very far away now. When you see us truly, you will know. Celine woke in her small rented room, tangled in sheets, her heart racing. The clock on her bedside table read 3:47 a.m. She lay still, trying to hold onto the dream, but already it was slipping away like water through her fingers. Except for one thing, the absolute certainty that she had to return to the marsh tomorrow, that something impossible and true was waiting for her there. Celine spent the next day in a strange, distracted state. She tried to paint in her room, but her hands wouldn't cooperate. She kept seeing those 2 figures in her mind. Were they cranes or people? Had she really dreamt them speaking, or had her imagination simply run wild? She went for a walk through the town, trying to clear her head. She bought coffee at the cafe on Main Street and sat by the window, watching people pass. Normal people, living normal lives. The world seemed so solid, so real. How could curses and transformations exist in the same world as coffee shops and cell phones? But Celine had always existed a little bit outside the normal world. Even as a child, she'd seen things others missed. She's got the sight, her grandmother had said once. She sees the threads that connect things, the patterns underneath. By late afternoon, she couldn't stand it anymore. She packed her art supplies and walked to the marsh, arriving a full hour before sunset. The light was still too harsh for painting, but she didn't care. She set up her easel in the same spot as before and waited. The marsh was alive with sound. Frogs sang in the shallows. Insects hummed in the reeds. Somewhere in the distance, a fish broke the surface of the water with a soft splash. Celine tried to calm her breathing, tried to quiet her racing thoughts. What if they didn't come? What if the whole thing had just been a dream? But as the sun began its slow descent, as the light turned golden and soft, she heard it again, that sound like wind through feathers, like music made of air. The two cranes descended from the sky. They landed in the exact same spot as yesterday, in the shallow pool surrounded by cattails. This time Celine was ready. She didn't move, barely breathed. She opened herself up the way she did when she was painting something important. She let go of expectations, of logic, of everything she thought she knew about the world. She just watched. The cranes stood still for a moment, looking at each other. Then slowly they turned to face Celine. Even from 30 feet away, she could feel the weight of their gaze, the question in it. "Can you see us?" Celine nodded, not sure if she was answering them or herself. The dance began. It was the same as yesterday, yet completely different. The same movements, but now Celine understood what she was watching. This wasn't mating behavior or territorial display. This was two souls trying desperately to be seen, trying to show the world who they really were beneath feathers and beak and wing. The cranes circled each other, graceful and urgent. They leaped into the air, wings spread wide, calling out in voices that sounded almost like words. Celine's hands moved across the canvas, but she wasn't thinking about technique anymore. She was just trying to capture the truth of what she saw. And then, as the sun touched the horizon, it happened. The light shifted, turning everything amber and rose. The air itself seemed to thicken, to shimmer, and in that perfect suspended moment between day and night, Celine saw it. The cranes began to blur. Their forms rippled like reflections on water, and suddenly, impossibly, two people stood in the marsh where the birds had been. The woman, dark-haired, young, with eyes that held an ocean of longing. The man, tall, gentle-faced, reaching for her hand. They stood there, fully human, their bodies solid and real in the fading light. They looked at each other with such love, such relief at being themselves again, even if just for a moment. And Celine knew their names. The knowledge rose up from deep inside her, just as the woman in the dream had said it would. It came from a place beyond memory, beyond logic. It came from the same place where all true things lived. The place she touched when she painted, when she managed to capture not just what something looked like, but what it was. "Maylene," she whispered, her voice barely audible. The woman's name tasted like spring rain, like first light. "Tian," she said, louder now. The man's name felt solid in her mouth, like stone warmed by the sun. The two of them gasped as if they'd been holding their breath for 1,000 years. "Again," Maylene said, her voice breaking. "Say them again. Say them together." Celine stood up, her painting forgotten. The sun was halfway below the horizon now. Time was running out. "Maylene and Tian," she said clearly, firmly, letting the names ring out across the marsh. "I see you. I know you. Maylene and Tian." The air cracked. The light intensified, turning everything gold and white and impossibly bright. Celine had to shield her eyes. When she looked again, they were still there, still human, but something was different. They looked more solid now, more real. The shimmer at their edges was gone. Tian fell to his knees in the shallow water, laughing and crying at the same time. Maylene covered her face with her hands, her shoulders shaking. "It worked," she sobbed. "Oh gods, it actually worked." Tian pulled her down into his arms, holding her as if he'd never let go. They stayed like that for a long moment. Two people embracing in the middle of a marsh as the last light faded from the sky. Finally, they looked up at Celine. "Thank you," Maylene said, her face wet with tears. "Thank you for seeing us." "How do you feel?" Celine asked, still half convinced this couldn't be real. Tian looked down at his hands, human hands with long fingers and calloused palms. He flexed them, turned them over, pressed them against his face. "Strange," he said, laughing. "I'd almost forgotten what it felt like to have hands, to stand like this." "The curse is broken," Maylene said wonderingly. She touched her arms, her face, her hair, as if relearning her own body. "We are free. We're really free." "What will you do now?" Celine asked. The two of them looked at each other, a whole conversation passing between them in silence. "Live," Tian said simply. "We'll finally get to live. We'll find a place in this new world. Strange as it must be, we'll plant a garden, learn new skills, maybe have children someday." He squeezed Maylene's hand. We'll do all the ordinary things we dreamt about for 999 years. Maylene turned to Celine. What about you? How did you see us when no one else could? Celine thought about it, looking out at the marsh, at the way the last light caught on the water. I think I've always seen things other people miss, she said slowly. My whole life I've looked at the world and seen the things beneath the surface. The truth hiding under the ordinary. That's why I paint. It's the only way I know to show people what's really there. Then you have a gift, Tian said. A real one. Don't ever lose it. I won't, Celine promised. As full darkness settled over the marsh, the three of them stood together in the gentle night. Frogs sang, stars began to appear, and two people who had been cursed to live as cranes learned to be human again, one breath at a time. Celine returned to the marsh every evening for the next month. Sometimes Maylene and Tian were there, slowly adjusting to their restored humanity. The town accepted them without too many questions. Celine told people they were distant relatives who'd been living off the grid. People helped them get identification, taught them how to use smartphones. The bakery owner gave them jobs. They told Celine stories about the old world, about the village they'd fled from, about the centuries they'd spent as birds. We saw empires rise and fall, Maylene said once, sitting on a fallen log as the sun set behind them. We flew over battlefields and festivals, over cities being built and forests being cleared. The world changed so much, so fast. Sometimes it was terrifying. Sometimes it was beautiful. We saw the first trains, Tian added, the first cars, the first planes. We saw wars, so many wars. But we also saw the best of humanity, strangers helping strangers, children laughing in ruins, people planting trees they never see fully grown. Do you miss it? Celine asked. Flying, I mean. They both thought about that for a while. Sometimes, Maylene admitted, there was a freedom to it, the wind under our wings, the whole sky opening before us. But this, she held up her hands, laced her fingers through Tian's. This is better. This is what we chose. This is what we fought for. Celine painted them often, but never as cranes. She painted them as they were now, two people learning to live again, their faces full of wonder at ordinary things. Tian tasting honey for the first time in centuries, Maylene laughing at the feeling of grass between her toes, both of them dancing, really dancing, with human bodies at sunset for the pure joy of it. One evening, as Celine was packing up her supplies, Maylene asked her a question. Will you stay here in this town? Celine looked around at the marsh, at the way the light played on the water, at the two people who had become her friends through the strangest circumstances imaginable. Yes, she said, surprised to find it was true. I think I will. This place, it's taught me something about seeing, about truth, about the magic that exists when we pay attention. Good, Tian smiled. The world needs people like you. People who look beyond the surface, who speak the true names of things. Celine carried that thought with her as she walked home through the darkening streets. She thought about all the things in the world that might be cursed, trapped, hidden, waiting for someone to truly see them and speak their names aloud. She thought about the power of witnessing, of recognition, of being seen. And she thought about two cranes who had danced at sunset for 999 years, carrying hope in their hearts until finally someone looked at them and saw the truth. In her small rented room, Celine started a new painting, not of cranes or people, but of the moment between. That shimmer of transformation, that brief instant when one thing becomes another. She painted it in gold and amber and rose, with two figures at its center, neither fully bird nor fully human, but something in between. She titled it Bound, and then in smaller letters underneath, and set free. Outside her window, two cranes flew past in the last light of day. Or perhaps they were just two people out for an evening walk, their shadows long on the ground. Celine smiled and returned to her painting, her brush moving with calm certainty across the canvas. She was beginning to understand that the world was full of transformations, if only you knew how to look for them, if only you were willing to see. She had come to this town looking for inspiration, for a sacred space to cultivate her art. Instead, she'd found magic, friendship, and the knowledge that her strange gift of seeing was exactly what it needed to be. Some people were meant to see clearly, to look past the surface, to speak truth, and Celine, she realized, was one of them. Thanks for spending this quiet moment with me. If you enjoyed the painting or the story, I'd love to have you join me again. Before you go, I'm curious. Have you ever had a moment where you truly saw someone or felt truly seen yourself? Maybe it was a fleeting glance, a conversation, or just being in the right place at the right time. I'd love to hear about it in the comments below. Until next time, keep looking for the magic beneath the surface.